Hi everybody, Dr. Pingle here. This is going to be part 2 of a session on creating custom 3D printed maps. What I have here is just a standard hypsometric tint of a map of the world. It's in a Robinson projection. If you've followed along with the previous video, you could probably recognize this. What I want to do now is talk about how we can maybe cut out or only show particular shapes. So one of the nice things about touch terrain is touch terrain lets you just sort of grab a rectangle and create tiles and print them out. But one of the things it doesn't let you do is create sort of custom shapes. So at the beginning, I had showed an example of a map of Africa. So what if we don't want to print some kind of a square thing? What if we just want to print that? And actually, when you print out what we've done in part 1, what you'll see is really just a round piece here. But I kind of glossed over the details of how that part was done. And essentially, the way it works is because all of this is being mapped to a height value using a color map, with black being 0 height and the white being the tallest one that you set up with the dialog box, you can control how tall things get by sort of fiddling around with these values. So if I set this down to a smaller value than this, then more of this map is going to be gray. So we can bring this up and look at the symbology of it. So right now our color ramp goes from -450 to 870, but if we change this to custom, we can actually play with these values a little bit more. So if we set this to -1000, for instance, that's going to have the effect of making the background information lighter in color. And the lighter the color is, the taller it's going to be when it renders in Cura. So I like talking about this stuff because it makes you really think about color maps and how they're related. And we can change this even further. So the more we dial this down, we can set this to -5000. This is going to be kind of a nice white color. And if we rendered this out, so we'll go back into our layout, share, and export. We'll call this 3D map v2. All right, and compared to what we had before, if we open a file up, and this time we're going to open this version 2, and you can see even in the thumbnail, you can really start to see this. We're going to hit OK. We're going to set the height to 15 again. We're going to set the base to 0. All these settings were what we had before. Lighter is higher with no smoothing. We'll hit OK. What we're going to get is a base that comes up. So whereas before this base was rather thin, now this base is rather thick. And so the idea here is the further down you drive this number, so right now, this is still kind of a bug here, but right now this is set to -5000. The more you drive this down, the thicker this base is going to be. So that's going to be kind of important. And you can actually go through and calculate how. I think that's probably overkill for this lecture. You can probably ballpark it well enough just visually. Now the second bit here that I wanted to talk about was what if you wanted to carve out a little piece. So in this case, what I want to do is just download a shapefile. So we're going to look up the cartographic boundary files. We've looked at these before. I just want to pull in states. And you could probably dig through Esri and use some of that stuff. But we don't really need to. I'm going to choose the 1 to 20 million stuff right now, and we're just going to save this into the same sort of project directory that we've been working in here for a second, and unzip that. Okay. So back in ARC, we can go load our data back in. Oops. There we go. Oh, I lost the button. Where did we put it? Oh, we're in layout mode. Here we go. That's fine. We can go back into our map and we can add our data. So we're going to go into that temp directory where we're going to pull in those cartographic boundary files. And there we have our states, and it's going to draw on top of the train. It's just redrawing that now. So I'm going to zoom in here. And reproject my data. This time we're going to choose something a little bit more appropriate for just the lower 48. So we can go into continental North America, excuse me, North America. And we could choose one of these. This is going to work just fine. Very nice. Okay, so what if we wanted to clip the elevation layer to, let's say, a state or a region or the lower 48? How would we do that? Well, one of the things that we could do is we could run a clip and just pull out the values that we care about. If we did that, that would produce an elevation layer that was just sort of the boundaries of the United States or just a particular state, and that would work just fine. Unfortunately, this cloud-based layer doesn't really lend itself very well to clipping. So we're going to need to download an elevation set that's going to work. One recommendation is that you can download the eTopo1 Global Relief Model. Whether you download the ice surface or the bedrock is up to you. It really depends on what you're doing. I'm going to go ahead and download the grid registered georeferenced TIFF. So grid is the authoritative registration. The other one is interpolated off of that. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this and download it. And I'll pause the video while that comes in. Okay, I downloaded it and I've got a copy of it here. So it's in this directory. This is the layer that I need. So I'm just going to come back over here, add data. This time browsing to my downloaded data set. Whoops. Again, if your data seems to be missing, go ahead and hit the refresh button. So here it is. And this is the piece that I want to bring in. Okay, so this is my eTopo1 data set, in this case layered on top of the terrain. And keep in mind that eTopo1 contains bathymetry, which you may very well be interested in. I'm going to get rid of this layer for now because we are done with it. We have a local layer that we can work with. Notice that these values go from about 8,000 meters to negative 10,000. So if we zoom out, keep in mind that one of the things you're getting here are the trenches, which you may be interested in or you may not be interested in. And in our case, all I really want to do is clip out one of these values. So what I'm going to do is select a state. So we can select Virginia, Iowa, Texas. I'm from Iowa, so we're going to go ahead and use Iowa as our model. And then we're going to do a clip. Okay, so our input raster is going to be eTopo1. Our output extent is going to be our cartographic boundary layer. I'm going to use the input features for clipping geometry, which means we're going to clip to the boundaries of Iowa. The output data set, you can write wherever you want. I'm going to stick this back into the temp directory that I've been working with, so we'll just call this iowa.tiff. We don't need to worry too much about the no data value, and we'll go ahead and run the tool. This should run pretty quickly. The eTopo1 dataset is a 1 kilometer grid dataset, which may sound pretty coarse, but keep in mind that you're printing something at a very small map scale, even the size of a print bed. and so this will sort of necessarily be a rather coarse model. So if we uncheck this and we uncheck that, what we should be left with is just the topo map of Iowa. We can zoom in on that. There's some really interesting features here. So you can probably see some of this. This is sort of the glacial advancement into Iowa. You can see sort of the moraines at the end of it. I'm going to go ahead and I could reproject this. So one of the things that I find appealing about this, especially if you're going to be printing something local, is that straight lines are straight. So the top of Iowa is a straight line. It's a line of latitude. So I am going to change my projection to Mercator. All right. So scale is going to be a little bit inaccurate, but that's okay. Shape is actually just a little bit slightly inaccurate at this scale as well. And you can see we've got a dip in here that we ordinarily probably wouldn't want. That's okay. We're going to go ahead and leave that alone for now. If we were a little bit more mindful of how we did the clipping, some of that would go away. If you really want a patch for this, one of the things that you can do is you can draw the vector lines around this. So for instance, I could load this back up again. We could do a definition query here where we really are interested in that the state name is not equal to Iowa. And what that's going to do is that's going to overlay all of this stuff with everything except Iowa. And if we changed this to black, that's going to make all of that mute out, and you can see that we're essentially smoothing out and recovering some of the pieces here. We also have some kind of bad values. You can look carefully here around the edges. Those don't look outstanding. One of the things that you can do to fix that is essentially to draw thicker lines. So if you imagine just these hollow extents here, we could go in and we could change this symbol to something a little bit thicker. And if you want to edit these features and make it even thicker than that, you can come in here and change the thickness as you've probably done before. So this would have a tendency to really kind of mask a lot of those marginal areas around the end that are probably going to cause more trouble than they're worth. Now, we have this range that goes from 153 to 498. One of the things I want to do here before we get out of here is change. We're going to change this back to black. And then change the outline width back up to mask these areas out around the edge. So there we have a nice smoother appearance where we're getting rid of those sort of white flecks that show apart that are going to cause problems with our 3D model. Okay, so one of the things that we want to do is we want to modify our symbology slightly. So if we come in here, we'll go ahead, that's fine. Oh, that might be a little too thick, hold on. Just one more. There we go. Okay. Great. All right. So one of the things we're going to need to do is just make some minor modifications to this. As kind of a base point to see what things look like for now. If we go under layout, you can see that we're still at this kind of world view. What we need to do to interact with this, we're going to need to activate our layer. So what we've got here is just a little section of it that we want to work with here. So we need to zoom in here. So we're going to activate our layer. and that's going to let us zoom in on just Iowa. All right, we're going to be careful to kind of fit it into the boundaries. Remember, this is again our print bed set to black. And with that done, we can export our our map. So we're going to sort of commit those map changes. We're going to deactivate or close the activation here, and then we can go back up to share, export, and we can export this as iowa.png. Okay, so we're back in Cura. We'll start a new project here, and we can open a file. We're going to open iowa.png, and we're going to set these just like we did before. And we would get something that looks like that. Now, keep in mind that the minimum thickness is going to be related to what you see here. So essentially, our color map, our color ramp, goes from a minimum value of 153, which is black, to a maximum value of 498, which is white. Where this falls down here is going to control where that 0 point is. So this is in Iowa. The Mississippi runs along the eastern border, and if we move this around by right-clicking, we can see those minimum values showing up just on kind of the southeast corner of the state. So it goes from kind of a taller value in the northwest. This is the glacial area, just kind of scooped right out, and then the river systems kind of move through here until they reach the Mississippi. If we wanted to enhance this effect and sort of make this a little bit taller, and we may not, we can go back in here, we can change our color ramp. Maybe we want to set this to minimum and maximum. We can come in here and calculate custom statistics and essentially set this to something lower. The lower you make it, the taller that base is going to be. If I make this 100, then that base is going to be that much taller. So we'll export this as Iowa. Clear the project and add this data back in. If you right-click on this, you can try to hit center the model, and that may help. Now, I cranked this down a little bit, so I set it to 100 instead of about 140 something. And you can see that it's built up this southeast corner just a little bit. If I would continue to make that number lower, that's going to cause the shape of Iowa to kind of rise off of the page. Okay, so at this point, you could do exactly what we did before. So right now, you may see this slicing window showing up on your lower right as you're adding models or subtracting models. When you add those models, it's going to need to figure out how to move the print head to actually produce this print. And for a large, complicated model, that may take a few minutes. But once you're done, you can come down here and select Save to File. Again, select STL, and we'll just call this iowa.stl. And that is exactly the same kind of file that you can put on a thumb drive and you can bring to have printed at your local print shop or the library or whoever has printers. So we'll do one more quick lecture on how to do this with non-spatial data. So stay tuned for, non-elevation data. So stay tuned for part 3. Thanks.